Welcome to Childcare Conversations, the podcast for childcare leaders ready to move from overwhelmed to confident and capable. You're joining Kate and Carrie, early childhood experts with over 20 years of experience. Since 2002, they've helped equip and train over 4,500 directors nationwide with real-world systems, practical tools, and the confidence to run a center where both staff and children thrive. This episode is brought to you by ECE NAC, the National Administrator Credential created by directors for directors. If you're tired of juggling compliance, budgets, and burnout, ECENAC.com is built for you. Now let's get into today's conversation, one we think you're really going to enjoy.
Welcome back, folks. We are so glad that you are joining us for today's conversation. As we start the new year, a lot of folks are doing a lot of reflection and kind of figuring out, did I do things right? Over the course of January, you'll be hearing episodes about tax strategies. We're going to talk today about insurance. You'll get all kinds of different perspectives in the month of January, and we are really excited about this month's guests. But before we get too far into telling you what's happening in January, we're just going to have a conversation about today. And so today's guest is Sam Phillips. Carrie and I have known Sam for several years, and although we've had other insurance folks on in the past, one of the things that really struck Carrie and I hearing Sam talk at a conference in December was some ahas that were like, oh, that makes so much sense. Why has nobody said that before? And so, Sam, I'm going to ask you to tell folks a little bit about your background, how you ended up here and how you ended up with childcare as one of your focuses, and kind of the what sparked our conversation, and then we'll go into, well, just that, a conversation. So
that was a lot to unpack. Okay, so let's start. Probably going to forget halfway through once I start talking all of the 4 things you just gave me to talk about. So let's start with, who am I? What's my background? How did I get here? I've been insuring childcare providers for, let's see, my son is about to be 15, so 15 years. And I actually came to this industry. I am a specialist in early childhood programs, but I came to this industry after not being able to find childcare for my son. Ended up down the street, took a pay cut to start at this little insurance agency I didn't even know existed. I'd never even heard of it, but it was right down the street from a preschool. And after being on a waiting list forever, we finally got in. I loved the location because it gave me closer access to my kids. I was not spending an hour one way in traffic every day. But what got me down this path of teaching and educating, I liked the concept of insurance. I knew nothing about it when I started. I took a receptionist role and literally knew nothing about insurance. And that was a problem for me because I'm a Y girl. And I would annoy the crap out of the people in the office because I was constantly asking them questions. And they're like, why do you keep asking us questions? Like, just do the work. But I need to understand, like, why? I need to understand what I'm doing. But more importantly, I needed to understand what we were selling. Like, what was our job there? And what does general liability mean? What does professional liability mean? And so I would go home and I would highlight this policy verbiage and look it up and research it and try and figure out how to explain it in a way that made sense to me.
You didn't have a chat GPT.
No, I didn't have a chat GPT. And I'm told all the time now that I have a knack for explaining things in a way that makes it make sense. And I think it came from me doing so much research in the very beginning, trying to make it make sense to me. While I was working at this agency, my son had an injury at his preschool, and the director actually called me, and she was very calm and mild-mannered, and like to the point that I didn't think it was an emergency. I actually finished my email because it didn't sound like an emergency. She didn't sound panicked. Instant mom guilt when I saw the gash in his forehead when I went to pick him up. But it was that ended up being a traumatic experience. He needed stitches. The numbing cream didn't work. It took multiple staff members, including my husband, holding him down to stitch him up because the numbing meds didn't work. And all I could do was hide in the corner and plug my ears and eyes and pray that we both got through that moment, because he's screaming on this table like for me to rescue him. And I can't stop that. Um, anyways, that whole ordeal was terrible. And when I eventually took him back to his preschool, and the director had been great. She'd been following up with us, checking in on him. But when I took him back to his program, she asked me, and I kid y'all not, I felt like a deer in the headlights. And I have no idea how long I stared at her in silence, just in disbelief. But she asked me, will our insurance cover this? And she knew I worked at the agency. The agency I worked at actually insured his preschool and had insured his preschool for almost 20 years. And it just blew my mind that we were right down the street and they had no idea if their insurance would cover that. And so that just became the start of this brainchild for, like, there's a serious lack of education in the industry on the topic of insurance, specifically for childcare programs. And that kind of set with me for several years before I realized, first, I felt like I had to gain some confidence. I had to know more about what I was doing. I had to do the work and learn all the things. And then after I did, I started creating content and information to teach people about the things that I had learned and the things I was continuing to learn as I went. And so that's how that's how we've crossed paths, because y'all seen me out and about teaching all the things. And then what else did you want me? Oh, the one thing that I said that you wanted me to unpack. So while I was speaking last week, one of the things that I had mentioned that Kate and Carrie thought was just a brilliant perspective was the concept of splitting up your insurance policies. And not just splitting up your insurance policies by the different types of coverage you need, but also by, if you're a multi-unit owner, if you have separate legal entities for each of those operations, splitting up your insurance by the different legal entities. So you have one set of policies.
But Sam, we see all the commercials, and the commercials always tell us that we save more money when we bundle.
They don't insure childcare businesses. Or see the opposite of that, right? We are seeing so many companies that are exiting childcare and just choosing not to do it at all anymore. And that's continuing to be a thing. I'm still seeing red flags that a couple of the insurers they're like 1 foot in, 1 foot out already, that are still in the industry right now. And one of the reasons for that is because providers you're not taught insurance strategy. I used to be an agent that would say, let's bundle this, because it made sense, right? Uncomplicated billing, and Lord knows billing is already a nightmare enough with insurance companies because they're stuck in the Stone Age. But that's a whole nother, we'll save that for a different day. We're seeing claims become more and more a frequent situation, and that is not helping providers find or keep their insurance. So one of the things that absolutely breaks my heart is hearing somebody tell a story that their insurance got dropped after they filed their first claim that was really a bogus claim, and they've had insurance for 20 years and have been great paying clients and never had any issues, and all of a sudden they're getting a non-renewal. Or they didn't have the claim experience and got a non-renewal. The problem with that, when you bundle your coverage, is you lose everything. If it's all bundled together, if you have a liability incident, you lose your property, your auto, your abuse coverage. If you have an auto incident, you lose your property, your general liability, your abuse, your umbrella, you lose all the things.
Okay. So I know you're saying words that I actually understand, but not everybody does. So let's break down the part that I found it fascinating, right? So what Sam is saying is that most of you have a vehicle. So your vehicle should be on its own policy. If you are the building owner, your building should be in its own policy under its own LLC or its own corporation.
We call that
lesser's
risk.
Hopefully you've already got an accountant and a lawyer who've talked to you about that. So that's a separate episode. So you've got your building insurance, you've got your automobile insurance, and then you've got your liability insurance for the business. And then you've got abuse insurance coverage, which we also know that not everybody, like we've had episodes on that specific topic. So hopefully you also have that coverage. If you're not, I want to know why. Call Sam.
And also your accident insurance. And you might have one or two of those bundled, but don't have all of them bundled, is what Sam is saying. Because if you have an accident policy for a kid who trips and gets a big old stitch in their forehead, that should not be going on your general liability. That should be going on the accident insurance. Please don't put that under your general liability.
So you got to love it when technology has a mind of its own. And so we are back. You probably have a little bump in your recording, and that is okay. So we were talking with Sam Phillips about the different types of insurance. And I think one of the things that was coming out from that conversation is that a lot of times we aren't educated as business owners on what types of policies we use for what purpose. So Carrie was giving some examples of don't use your property insurance for this type of claim or whatever. And I think the one thing that like popped in my head, and Sam, tell me if I'm right, if you are a business owner or even more a director listening to this episode, before you file any insurance claim, call your broker and have a conversation, because I know that one of the things that came out a few years ago was people who were having catalytic converters removed from their vans, and they were submitting it against their policies, which again were bundled, and they were losing coverage over really fairly small claims percentage wise of what you're covering. And so talk to us a little bit. If you are a director and owner listening, why should your insurance agent maybe be the first call? And what would be things to think about or to ask? And when do you call?
Okay. Also a loaded question and lots to unpack. You always start with your agent, right? They are supposed to be your trusted advisor. If you don't feel like you can trust them, you probably need a new one. But it's your agent's responsibility to know for any given situation which insurance policy would be the one. In the case with the auto, one of the things that started this conversation was needing to split that apart. There are still a few companies that the auto is bundled with everything else. So in some circumstances, you may not have a choice but to turn that into the same company that carries the rest of your coverage, your liability, your property. But when it's separate, Progressive, Berkshire Hathaway, for instance, those are two companies that insure childcare transportation vehicles, and they'll do it on a standalone basis, meaning it is its own policy. So if you did have a catalytic converter stolen, which happens all the time, that is hands down the most common claim, at least for autos. Your broker would be able to tell you, this is the company, here's your policy number, here's the link or phone number to call and report that claim, so that you're not just looking through this list of 10 different companies and names and trying to figure it out on your own.
And are there times that it makes sense to, even though you have insurance, to just self-insure, to just go buy yourself a new catalytic converter?
It depends on your circumstances, obviously, and some people are a little bit more risk tolerant than others. The one thing I would say, don't ever use your auto insurance for, we live in Texas, right? There is road construction literally everywhere. The amount of chips that I get in my windshield, the amount that I have in there right now, until they come in my line of sight, because we all know it doesn't impact you until it's in your line of sight. But that is one thing I have had providers canceled over because they submitted so many windshield chip, like in your windshield glass chip claims. I had one guy submit 6 of those in a year, and so they're small. I mean, $300-$400, but it was the claims frequency thing that became an issue. So when you look at what your deductible costs, and usually those windshield chips, like they're not subject to a deductible because they're relatively small. But if it's something that your insurance company might cancel you over, at that point you have to chat it out with your agent and decide, is this worth, if I submit this potentially $350 claim and have insurance pay it versus paying the $350 myself and potentially lose my insurance over paying the $350 and not losing my insurance. You've got to make the choice that you feel like is the best for your business. But there are claims, and it also depends on what your policy says. I mean, there are certain letters of representation are not formal lawsuits. So with certain policies, it might be worded in a way that you have to report anything and everything that might give rise to a suit to your insurance company. But with other insurance policy verbiage, you may not have to. So again, you have to rely on your agent to know exactly what the policy says and what your requirements are and whether or not you have to report it or can pay it yourself.
Okay, so
Okay.
you've used a term interchangeably, I think, or maybe there's differences. And so I thought it might be worth having a short discussion because I've heard the term broker
Mhm.
and I've heard the term agent. And in my head, they're two different things. And so for folks who are listening, hopefully they also know that they need to go find a specialist who specializes in childcare. And again, depending on even the size of your childcare enterprise, because if you've got 17, that's probably still a different type of insurance coverage than if you've got one or two locations or you're running out
Or,
of your house.
yeah, I was going to say, or you're a home-based program, because we have a fair number of the home-based programs that listen as well.
Well, in multiple states, because we know that just gets even more of a reason. So again, hopefully you've had a conversation with your accountants, your attorneys, your tax strategy folks about the fact that you have all of these set up as separate entities. So if you've got 3 locations, I'm hoping you're running 6 different businesses. But again, that is a separate podcast.
So is there a difference, Sam, between an insurance agent and an insurance broker, and which one do people need?
Yes, but people that don't work in insurance do use them interchangeably. So to y'all, an agent and a broker might be the same thing. From our perspective, we are insurance agents. I'm an insurance agent. To me, an insurance broker that's my intermediary between an insurance agent and a surplus lines company. So for the admitted market, which are the companies that we used to always be able to get insurance from, those are like the first tier group of insurers that you want policies from. They typically have less exclusions, they have broader coverage, the premiums tend to be more affordable. That's what we find in the standard market. There's hardly anything left in childcare, or hardly anything left in the standard market for childcare. So as agents, we have to reach out to a broker that gives us access to an additional tier of insurance companies called surplus lines. An insurance broker, wholesaler. Those are all terms that you can use interchangeably for them too. But from somebody that works in insurance, when we hear broker, what that actually means to us is that is our go-to person to be able to access the additional companies that we can't get to on our own because it requires a separate insurance license. It requires a surplus license.
So then I have an even bigger question.
Okay.
Because in my head, the companies like y'all who are not a single company. So in other words, you're not a State Farm or you're not a Nationwide.
Not a captive agent. That's the phrase. Not a captive agent.
Not a captive. We're independent agents.
Okay. So that's the phrase that in my head was a broker. So really they're independent agents, not necessarily brokers.
Yes.
So
independent
you
agents
need to make
have
sure
access to multiple insurance companies. They're not loyal to just one, or they don't just have to sell one like your State Farm or Farmers.
Okay. All right. So that's important. So in other words, if you're listening and you notice that, yes, you may have multiple coverages, but if they're all with State Farm, that kind of defeats a little bit about what you were talking about earlier on the first half about separating out the different types. Would I be correct in making that assumption?
Yes, because with a company like State Farm, you're really only going to have a package option, so they're not going to have the ability to piece it out. And on that, so here's another reason that was me saying that was more of a foreign concept. it requires so much work to separate insurance by operation and by different types of policies. Easily 4 times the amount of work. So it's not something that most agents want to do, but it's in the best interest of the client with where the market is right now. So if I can separate out the policies and know that my clients stand a better chance to hold on to that coverage for longer than they would if I kept it together, I'm going to do 4 times the amount of work because it's what they need. It's
Well,
not
what
fun.
a
But
I mean, but just the like I said, to me this was an aha moment, because even if I just think about, and I'm just going to break it into 3 bundles, even though I know like there's 5 or 6 different ways to separate it, just separating out car, property, and liability was such a like an aha, because we knew that there was already some issues with folks with, again, property damage, depending on where you are in the country. Sometimes if you've got catastrophic 1 in 100 year issues, people were losing their coverage because of that flood or that hurricane or that freeze warning, and busted pipes in the South. We knew that there were people they're like, that's an act of God. Like, I have no control over that. And they were losing their policies, where I can see the real advantage of the building company having its own policy very separate from the business. And so hopefully, if folks get nothing out of this episode, one, you look for an episode coming soon. Carrie and I'll have to find this person, but an attorney or an accountant who talks about why you need to have all your businesses separated. So Carrie, please make a note.
Okay. I can do, or maybe we can find somebody who, suffered because they didn't. And so this is what happened to their business because they did not separate
Maybe they
all of their business entities into
maybe
different
that's one of those
files.
like the black, like they're just the silhouette on the
the black silhouette because they don't want anybody to know that they did a dumb.
they did a no-no. So Sam, if you know any no-nos, share it with us off the podcast. No, anyway.
a long list.
Oh, that's kind of scary. Okay. So anyway, so hopefully you've gotten a couple of tips and hopefully that makes some clear. So Sam, if somebody has more questions, I mean, obviously in our show notes, we're going to have a way for folks to get in contact with you, but maybe they don't live near Texas, or maybe they just want to be more knowledgeable before they pick up the phone and call their insurance agent, because this is just like something they're totally foreign with. Do you have a resource, perhaps?
So I am the greatest resource. You can always pick up the phone and call me. But our website is full of information, especially about the childcare insurance crisis.
I don't want your website. What's that other thing that you have? That pink
the
thing.
Narrative. That's the narrative template.
The pink thing. The sparkly book.
Oh, y'all! I'm not used to being an author. Look, I wrote a book. I keep forgetting that I wrote a book. Yeah, the Childcare Insurance Playbook talks about the different types of coverages. There's a whole chapter on controlling the narrative and how to approach insurance companies for your renewal. And there's a whole chapter on insurance strategy, how to position your policies, how to structure those policies so that they protect your business for the long term and not just the here and now.
And do you have Insurance 101 vocabulary for those of us who are like, I have no idea what Sam is talking about?
I do. There's actually a whole chapter called the Decoder where I break down, in modern terminology, I break down insurance terms and language that the agent might use and give them to you in a fun way that is, trust me, y'all will understand. I think at one point I'm referring to something as like a Tinder swipe.
Yeah, I'm not swiping nothing. Okay, so no, Carrie, what would you like to say?
Like to say that knowing your insurance and insuring your business correctly is one of those big important things. As the director, if you're not the owner, you need to not just go, oh, I have the insurance in the binder that goes with me when we do a fire drill. We had a car accident. I'm going to immediately, please call instead the contact person at the bottom of that insurance binder that you have in your notebook. Don't just immediately do what you would do with your home insurance. Have a conversation with your owner or your board of directors before you make that call. You have to be much more conservative with this than you had to a couple years ago. I hope we conveyed that pretty well in today's conversation. So if you learned something today in this show, share it with someone else who needs to know, and make sure you're following this podcast on your podcast player of choice, and get in contact with your agent or with Sam. We have Sam's details in the show notes before, and we'll talk to you in a few days. Bye, guys.
Thanks for tuning in. We love bringing you real talk and fresh insight from the world of early childhood education. Be sure to follow us on social media to stay connected and catch all of the latest episodes. And if you're planning a conference, training, or special event, Kate and Carrie would love to speak to your audience. You can learn more about their keynote sessions and workshops at kateandcarrie.com. If you learned something today, share the show and leave us a review below. We'll see you next time on Childcare Conversations.